Hello everyone, I'm Mattsson and I'm here with a brand new Vaadin webinar. I was supposed to be joined by Alejandro, but we had some slight issues here at the last minute. We'll see if he can join us in just a moment, but let's get started. So today we're going to talk about Spring and Java EE, and specifically how do you use these technologies with Vaadin. We've made a couple of very nice products here during the last couple of months that we really want to showcase. Spring and Java EE are of course very much used in the Java world, especially on the enterprise side, and it's something that we get a lot of requests for, that hey, we want better support, we want more examples, how do I do this with Spring, how do I do this with Java EE and CDI and so forth. So what we did was we created app starters for you. App starters are full stack example applications that we built in-house and we're providing to you. Basically, they are fully functional applications from the bottom up. There's a database layer, there's a repository layer, there's CDI or Spring injections and UI of course, and everything is included, even testing. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's get the complicated stuff out of the way first. So first question of the day, Spring or Java EE, which is better? I'm not going to answer that. You know that they are very comparable in features nowadays. Of course, Spring is a bigger platform, it has more built-in features, but there's a lot of third-party stuff for Java EE that compensates for that lack. So for instance, Spring has its data repositories, whereas there is no such feature in Java EE, but DeltaSpike has kindly provided us with the DeltaSpike data library, which does pretty much the same thing in a CDI environment. So on a high level, these are basically interchangeable. So it's more of a preference of which one do you prefer? Do you like Spring or do you like Java EE? What's your existing stack? Which one fits better and so forth. So there's not a better one amongst them, and that's why we made two examples. So there's one for Spring and there's one for Java EE. A short word before we get started about the licenses for these. They are commercial, so both starter packs are commercial, and you'll need a Pro or a Prime subscription to be able to use these or take them into use. You can do whatever you want with the starter packs once you have the license, so you can modify and do whatever, create your own application based on them. That's completely fine. If you don't have a subscription, there's also a 30-day license that you can try these products out, and there's a very convenient feature on how you do that on the site that I'm about to show you very soon. So yes, they are commercial, but you can evaluate the code without buying with the 30-day license. So let's get started here. We're gonna jump into our new website here that has a very convenient start page. And as you can see, there's starter packs here. I'm gonna show you how to download it or customize it and download it for yourself so that you can follow along if you want to. You can select which one you want. There's a Vaadin 8 version. There might be something else there. Let's not show that too much. Underneath, we have the Bakery app, and that's what we're gonna take a look at today. There's a couple of other examples here as well, but the Bakery app starters are what we're gonna take a look at. So we select the Bakery. Then we scroll down and we can choose a framework. And as I said, we have a Spring and Java EE version. Choose which one you want to test. Then just fill in a group ID and a project name, and then make sure you have the licenses. So if you don't have any licenses, you can download them here. Also works for the evaluative licenses for the 30 days. So make sure you have the licenses installed. And then you just download the pack. So we have a builder that creates the Maven project for you, basically with your group IDs and so forth, and you get a zip file that has the code in it. Very easy. You can just import this into your favorite IDE and then run it, and what you will get is the demo that looks like this, or I'm going to show you this from the demo side here. bakery. Why did we make a bakery? Well, we thought about it for a while. Everyone does to-dos. To-do MVC, for instance, is a very popular thing, of course. There's a lot of examples on small applications, but we like cakes, so we made a bakery. So let's log in here. We have admin and admin. And when you log in, you'll see that it's a pretty simple application. I'm not going to go into details that much. It's basically a storefront for a bakery. So we have the storefront page. There's different orders here that you can go through and change the status of. Basically, if you're managing a bakery, this is the app that you want for managing the orders. So we have admin pages for users and products. There's the dashboard that you just saw for like management stuff, so we can see how many deliveries and so forth there is. The bakery uses a lot of our pro add-ons. So for instance, the charts add-on is here, and we're also using the board add-on, which helps us make it nice and very smooth in operation for responsive users. So if I minimize this page, you can see that yes, the menu shrinks a little bit, and then it shrinks even more, and so forth. So the application is fully responsive. This is one of the features that we wanted to show as well with the bakery. So the content of the app isn't really that interesting. Yes, you can order cakes and stuff like that, or input orders and manage orders. But of course, the most important stuff is what's underneath. So what have we actually made for you? What does this app starter include? Well, simply put, each of the app starters includes everything you need to create a fully functional web application, an enterprise web application using Vaadin and your tech stack of choice. So basically what we have here is everything from the data layer upwards. There's repositories, there's JPA entities, there's services, EGB or Spring services. We have the UI, we have navigation, we have URI fragment handling, we have tests, both integration tests and load tests. Basically everything you can think of that you need when you're starting an app. This is done because we didn't really have a full stack starter previously, and people kept asking us, okay, how do I do this basic setup stuff with whatever technology? And no, you don't really need to ask those questions. Of course, we'll answer them, but the answers are right here in the app. All right, there he is, managed to make it.
Hello, I finally made it, yeah, sorry. Hello everyone. As you know, we launched a new website just recently, and I've been trying to help with that a lot.
Yeah.
And we actually have some of these practices you're talking about in place there.
Yeah.
So,
small technical issues, nothing to worry about. You made it.
Yeah, I made it finally. It. So,
all right. So
we're explaining apparently the UI, right?
Well, I was just about to go into detail on the architecture actually. So I know it's a little bit small here on my screen. I have the code here set up, and I thought that we could go through the basic features of the architecture from the bottom up.
Right.
So let's see. We have a bunch of packages here. Even though it's a small application, it has quite a bit of code. Partly because it is slightly over-engineered, but that's also because we wanted to make like a best case scenario for you guys. So there's like the patterns that we use in architecture are all stuff that can be scaled onto enterprise levels as well. Yeah. So let's start with like the really bottommost layer, because that's not really Vaadin specific, and I think anyone that has used Java EE or Spring know about these sorts of things. So we'll start with JPA. I think most people know about JPA, so we can start here. I can show the customer entity, and as you can see, pretty normal JPA stuff. We're using bean validation here. as a best practice because that's what we use internally as well.
I can see this is the Spring project. Is it different from the Java EE project?
No, it isn't actually. I can show you here the Java EE version of the exact same thing. So let me find the same entity. And we have the customer here. And if I switch between these two, there's absolutely no other difference than the package name, because I needed two identical projects and they have their own packages. But basically the code on the JPA side is identical between the versions, or the entities are identical.
Cool, all right.
Then let's jump one step above. So here we see the first differences between the versions, or slight differences. We move on to the repository layer. So for instance, we have the customer repository here. And this is now for the Java EE bit. I'll show you the Spring bit in just a minute. But we didn't want to code everything by hand. And this is a best practices thing as well. So the best practice for Java EE or Spring is don't code it by hand most of the time. Sometimes you might have to fix a small one thing or another, but most of the time use the tools that are available to you. Yeah. So we're using the Delta Spike data library here to auto-generate repositories for us on the Java EE side. On the Spring side, we're using the Spring repositories to do the exact same thing.
And are these generated at compile time, runtime?
These are generated during startup. So okay. When the application starts up, the library scans for these repositories and generates the necessary methods. So as you can see, we don't really have any lines of code here except the declaration. So we have a customer repository that extends an entity repository of the type customer and long. So basically the entity type and then the entity ID type. And just using this, Delta Spike in this case can generate all the save, delete, update methods, list methods that we would ever need from JPA automatically for us. We don't need to do any coding whatsoever. We can just call customer repository.listAll. But we will get all customers.
But you can add some more methods later when you need it, right?
Yes, definitely. Okay. So the beauty of these repositories is that if you need some more extra stuff, then you can just add methods. Let me see if I can find an example. So for instance, here we have the pickup location repository, pickup location being another entity in the system. So this repository class now has all the basic features like list all and find and so forth. But in addition, we have find by name like ignore case here, this method, and we give it a string. And this is an interface, so we don't have any implementation for this. We just give Delta Spike a name of a method, and Delta Spike knows that, okay, we want to find by, so we want to find pickup locations by name, and then additionally like ignore case, so the basic query type that we want to use. So ignore the case of the string and then use a like operation to match the string to the data. And this should result in all the correct entities being returned.
And this is the Java EE implementation.
Yes.
How about the Spring implementation? Does it look similar or?
Let's take a look. So the pickup location repository looks like this in Spring. So it extends JPA repository, which is a Spring feature. And as you can see, it's basically exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
So there's an extra parameter here in this case. That's a Spring thing. And that's basically the only difference between them. As I said previously, both Spring and Java EE are exchangeable on a high level, and in these projects we've tried to make them as like each other as possible. So if you have one of the projects, Java EE for instance, you can take the Spring project and you'll be right at home. You'll know exactly what does what, because it's all the same, and we've tried to make it all the same, so that you can follow along and then maybe switch from one to the other if you want to take a look at that stuff.
So for me, I'm actually I've been using more Spring, so it would be very easy for me to take this code, maintain it, introduce new features, right?
Yes, definitely.
Awesome.
And yeah, even like the Java EE version, if you didn't know much about Java EE, then you can pretty much pick up the stuff from the code itself, especially if you look at them side by side in this example, because the features are basically the same.
That's beautiful.
So that's the very basic data layer, so normal store fetch operations. Most of that is auto-generated. We don't really want to mess with that. That's not interesting for our application. What is interesting, of course, is the business logic that we have.
Yeah.
And for that, we have service classes. So we have repositories that store and load data, and then we have service classes that do business logic. So if we need an operation that needs some logic, we don't want to put it in a repository class because that's not where it's supposed to go. The best practice is to have a service method for that.
Yeah. However, what if a UI wants to use directly a repository? Is it all right?
Yes, this is okay. So you can use a repository directly. If you just want an admin view that lists all users, then it's completely fine to just call the repository directly.
Okay.
This, of course, is an architectural decision. There's no technical limitation why it isn't possible, but you could limit your architectural patterns to not go to repositories. In this case, we figured that there shouldn't be an artificial limitation there. Services and repositories are basically on the same level. They're both on the data or backend level, and the UI should be able to call both.
So I guess in your experience, you have seen projects, you have worked on many projects as well.
Yeah.
You have seen some projects at least that actually do that. They have, for example, a reference to a service, some UIs, and some other UIs have a reference to a repository instead.
Yes, definitely. It really depends on what level of method you need. In some cases, you need more complex business logic and that would be in a service, and in some cases you just want to list all entities.
Yeah. Okay.
Of course, just as a reminder, this is a smaller project. If you're going a huge project, you probably want to have more sort of structure in there. You don't want the view to be able to call whatever. But I think that our examples here that we've made are pretty indicative of normal projects, like normal size of projects, and this is basically what we do all day here. We don't like very complex architectures. We prefer stuff that works but still has some structure.
All right, cool, interesting. Yeah, it's fight for simplicity, I guess.
Yes, fight for simplicity, definitely.
So that was about the services.
Yeah.
And where are these consumed or used in the UI? Or actually that was repository, these are the services?
Yeah, so the repositories fetch data and store data, but then if you want business logic, you might want to put that in a service. So here we have the order service class. Remember, we had an order repository. But in the case of orders, when we're handling orders, for instance, changing from one state to another, we need some validation and business logic and stuff like that. So we've created an order service class that, in this case, this is a Java EE example. It's a stateless EGB. And then we just have methods like change state here. So if the UI wants to change the state of an order, it calls this method, and then there's validation here. So for instance, we check that not the same state. We put the new state in, and then we do some other stuff of validation. For instance, here we add a history item, which means that we have a history of the state changes that is stored into the order at the same time, and then we call the order repository to actually save the data.
Okay.
So yes, technically we save the data, but we need to do some other operations first, and repositories are a bad place to put this sort of code.
Does this runs like in a transaction scope?
Yes. So this is an EGB. Every method runs in its own transaction, and we're just using the normal Java transaction API here. So it's all handled by the container in the case of Java EE, and similarly in Spring, it's all transaction managed.
So if we were saving many kind of instances there in the database, if one of them failed for some technical reason, it won't happen. The whole thing won't happen.
No, exactly. It's transactional, so either it works or it doesn't, and we get an error message. So It's atomic transactions. It's pretty basic stuff that both Spring and Java EE give you out of the box. So it's one good reason to actually use these frameworks.
Yeah. Cool, excellent.
So that's pretty much the basics of the data here. There's some utility classes and other stuff that I'm not going to show you. That there's a lot of small details here that I recommend you take a look at for yourself.
I have actually one question about this.
Sure.
Before you move on to the next maybe layer. Can we see the difference between this, which is Java EE, and the Spring version? Is it really different?
Of course.
Or?
So let's open up the order service in the Spring and flip between them. So again, they're pretty much identical except for the inject or the annotations. So the Java EE version uses stateless here, and the Spring version uses service, so Spring service. And there are technical differences between them, yes, but they are conceptually the same thing.
Okay.
They're business, e.g. business beans, business services that run in the back end that you call from other layers of your application. Also, of course, the difference between Spring and Java EE is Spring uses the auto-wired keyword here, and Java EE uses inject, or well, CDI uses inject.
Yes.
It's the same concept again, inversion of control, injection points, all of that stuff, but it's just a different name for the same thing.
Awesome. Cool. All right.
So that's the back-end stuff dealt with. Let's jump into how this actually works with Vaadin. And let's jump right into the UI class. So the UI and view itself has its own package structure here, and the app UI class is the root of the applications. The UI, of course, has a bunch of different annotations. This being a Vaadin application, we have theme, we have the title, and we also have the viewport annotation, which helps the responsiveness of the application. Also, the user isn't able to zoom in and mess up the application, so we have more control over how the browser behaves. This is very typical when you're using responsive applications that you want to fit on a phone screen. The user zooming in on that typically messes the layout up slightly, so it's better to disable that and then build your UI accordingly. What actually connects the UI to the backend or the technology underneath is, here in the case of Java EE, we're using the CDI UI annotation. So we're using the Vaadin CDI add-on to connect the Vaadin application to our backend. And this makes our Vaadin UI container managed bean, so it basically means it's living alongside everything else in Java EE and is able to use the Java EE services.
So this single annotation there is what makes instances of this class to be managed by the container?
Yes.
Just that?
Yes, just this. Cool. There's not even a servlet class here actually, because we don't need that. The Vaadin CDI servlet or CDI add-on includes a CDI servlet that automatically starts up the Vaadin application, configures everything for you, and then looks for UIs with this annotation and automatically deploys them to the correct place.
All right, pretty cool.
So it's even easier to deploy a CDI application than a standard Vaadin application. You don't even need a servlet class.
Yeah, you don't have to declare it or implement.
Yeah, no, it's automatically picked up as long as it's on a class path.
Cool.
The Spring version, exactly the same. The only thing that changed that instead of CDI UI, we use Spring UI. And then, of course, inject versus auto-wired in the constructor. But that's the only difference. They're like, the classes, the code, the feature are identical to each other between the versions. The only thing that's different is small implementation details, like which scope do we use, because they're not the same between Spring and Java EE.
Yeah.
And small differences like that. But most of the code is identical between the versions.
Awesome.
So, what else do we have here? Well, the UI class itself is pretty simple. What we do here is we create the navigation manager and then a main view of sorts to be able to manage the whole the structure of the application and navigation and stuff like that. The UI class doesn't really do anything except for set some basic stuff like the error handler, the charts, theme for the application, configures the navigation manager, and that's pretty much it.
So it's a very simple implementation for the UI.
Yeah, we typically like to do it this way, that the UI is responsible for like runtime configuration of the application. So configure the application once, and then we have everything else in a class that does that job and only that job. So we have separate classes for the main layout, for the navigation stuff, and for everything else that you might need. There's a separate class for that. We like to keep things separated, and it's easier to find the code later on when you're looking as well.
True, but I don't see any like particular or a specific like content for the UI. How do you render, for example, a form or a whole subview? How's that happening in this application?
Well, here you can see the set content method. That's the only layout stuff that we're actually doing in the UI. Yeah. So we're delegating all the rendering stuff to the main layout, so or the main view as it's in this case. So let's open up the main view. Here, this is the Spring version, so we're using Spring annotations. Spring View Display is a feature of the Spring Navigator, and that's part of the Spring add-on. So we use that here, and the CDI version has a similar one, but for the CDI stuff.
Okay.
Also, the UI scope, here it's the Spring one, and CDI version has its own UI scope. Other than that, you can see that main view extends main view design. And this is something that we also wanted to do explicitly here, that all UIs or all view classes here are done with the Vaadin designer, every single one. So even the main view, even though it is pretty easy, it's basically a menu bar on one side and then the content area, it's still done with the designer. And you can change the design using the Vaadin designer, or you can change the HTML if you want to. But still, we think it's a very convenient way to do your UIs, and even responsive ones, as you can see here in the example.
Yep.
So if you haven't used the designer previously, just a really short go through on how that actually works. So we have the main view design class, which is an auto-generated Java class from the designer. So as it says here, do not edit this file. This is not the master file. The master file is the HTML document, and that we can open up with the Vaadin designer. So main view design, let's open up that one. It's in the resources folder, and when I open it up, the Vaadin designer opens up here, and as you can see, it opens up the main layout. The demo that I showed you earlier, you can see there's the menu here on the left side, and then a blank content area where we put the actual views later on. But even though it looks nice, it's themed, of course, these are just basically buttons. So if I click on the storefront button here, it might be a little bit too small on your screen, I'm sorry for that, but it is a button here, and I can change the caption of the button using the designer if I want to. So I can just make this admin panel if I want to. And that's the wrong property that I changed. I need to change the caption. That works much better. So if I change the caption to admin panel, it immediately changes here in the designer, and then when I save, it saves in the HTML file, and the Java file is updated as well.
Yep.
When you have this done, so you've done your design, you have the HTML file and the Java file, you simply create your own class and then extend the design class, so the Java class that gets generated. In this case, it's the main view design, and you have all the buttons, the layouts, and everything is configured for you. You just need to add the data and click listeners and stuff like this.
So those were the protected fields in the main view design.
Yes, exactly. So the main view design here has all the buttons, for instance, in the menu. There's storefront, there's dashboard, all the different things that we have in the menu. So these are protected buttons, and then we can just call them here, for instance, in the init method of the main layout where we bind those to the navigation manager.
Yeah. So with the designer, you drag and drop components to
Yep.
a canvas sort of, that's the page.
Yes.
And then with this class that you extend, you add behavior, right?
Yes,
Okay,
exactly. So it's and one way of separating the actual rendering and the layout stuff from your logic. In this case, it's UI logic, but it's still logic, so it's nice to keep those two separated.
True, true.
All right. What else do we have here? Well, the navigator, I mentioned it briefly. So we're using the navigator, and as you can see here, the main view, when we create it, we have a navigation manager and also secured view access control. This is Spring Navigator stuff. I'm not going to go that deep to it, but suffice to say that we're using the Vaadin navigator for all navigation in the project, and we're also using the helpers from the Spring add-on and the CDI add-on because those have a lot of very nice helpers for the applications. One word of, well, not warning, but just an FYI, the CDI version of the navigator has some custom stuff in the project. That's because the version 3 of the CDI add-on is not out yet, so we can't use it here, but that will include all of the custom features that we made into the project. So rest assured you will get those shortly, but it's not out just yet.
That sounds like good news anyway.
Yeah. So, main view, navigator, designer. One thing that I wanted to talk about before we jump to another part here is the views themselves. So, as I mentioned, all views are done with the designer, but all views are also made, let's say, architecturally correct. And what I mean by that is, first of all, they're really simple in themselves. Each view is an encapsulated component that doesn't really know anything about the outside world. It doesn't know where it's placed. It doesn't know if it has any siblings or anything like that. It's just a view. And the way we manage communication between the different views and the different parts is the event bus. So either Spring event bus or then the CDI event bus. For CDI, we're using the built-in event bus of CDI. That works great. For the Spring version, we're using an add-on, so Petter Holmström's Spring event bus add-on from the directory. It's awesome, use it. So we're using that here. That's a feature that we actually got a question here, that if we could include the event bus into our real official add-on, and we are working on it. It's on our list, but you might see that we've been doing pretty a lot of stuff. Let's just say a lot of stuff during the last months here, and you'll see even more next week. So we've been a bit busy. Sorry about that, but we will get to it at some point. But yes, the views. So we start up with very basic views. There's stuff like the storefront view, which is just one class, or our class that we have the logic in is one. Of course, it has the design file as well. But storefront view, it is one view. It has all the logic that you would need for one view inside the one class, because the class is very small. It's about 120, 130 lines. So we don't really need to split it up into multiple parts. Yeah. It's okay, it's just one class, and that's fine. If it becomes bigger, then we can deal with it. Yeah. So that's how we like to do things. It's architecturally correct to have a view in one class. You don't necessarily need a pattern for very simple use cases, in our opinion at least.
True.
Of course, if your views are more complicated, like in our case, there's the CRUD views for the orders and the other stuff that we have here, users, products. Those we have made slightly more complicated, if you will, slightly more structured is the way I like to think about it. We're using the much talked about MVP pattern, okay. Or a version of it here. Of course, as I said, there's been a lot of discussion around MVP.
Very interesting discussions.
Yes, I would say so as well.
What's your opinion about value patterns? Should we use it always, for example? Doesn't matter what, small projects, big projects, or what's your
I would say that like MVP is a tool in the toolbox, and if you use it wrongly, then you're gonna end up with weird results. MVP is good. I like it, but you have to know how it works, and you have to be able to do it in a lightweight fashions. I don't think I've used like full MVP with interfaces for everything and a fully intelligent model that does all the things and all the stuff. I don't think I've ever done that. But what I do is I separate the view class from a presenter class so that I have logic in one place and then the view in another place.
And I guess these project starters, they use the MVP pattern?
Yes, it does use a very lightweight version of the MVP pattern. It's even calling it the MVP pattern is a little bit misleading because we don't have an explicit model in those packages. We're just using the entities directly.
So the entities are like the model of a shared.
Yes, it's a shared model of sorts, basically. If you want to take a look at them yourself, we have the view.admin packages. There's abstract CRUD presenter and abstract CRUD view that handle some of the setup stuff here for more complicated views. And I would suggest that you guys take a look at it if you're not familiar with the patterns, as an example on how to do more complicated views.
We have, I think, some Vaadiner published blog posts about this.
Yes, our resident Vaadin architect Petter Holmström, again, same guy that did the Spring add-on. He has actually made a very good blog post about this. It's called Is MVP Best Practice, where he goes through these exact use cases. So basically, if you have a small view or a small application, don't bother with MVP because it's overkill. And then he goes on to explain how to create some structure in your code in the beginning so that you can expand it if you need to. So we all know that software expands like a balloon sometimes in the development phase. So if you don't have like any sort of structure underneath, then you're going to be in trouble when you need to make it bigger. But if you have some, even if it's very little, then it's easier for you to make it bigger. And I think the way he explains MVP there is how we've made it in the demo as well, and it's a very good way of growing your application organically.
Yeah, I think we can actually link that blog post.
We'll put it down in the video descriptions, I think, and on the forum, so that you can take a look at that. All right, let's take a look at my old-fashioned paper list here and see if there's anything else that we need to cover before we end. There's a lot of features in the application. As I mentioned, there's like testing, for instance. We're gonna talk about that in just a few minutes. But there's other smaller stuff as well, such as the login handling. We use Spring Security in the Spring version and Shiro in the Java EE version. And all of that is like done so that it is production ready and you can take a look at it. And there's documentation on how you configure it and so forth. There's a data generator that generates the random data that you can see in the demo, but it's a good way of initializing your application. So if you need a place to put your code, then you can take a look at how did we do that, and then that might give you ideas on how to implement your own.
True.
Lots of other small things. If you're interested, I really do recommend that you take a look at the code yourself, just to get familiar with it, and you might find some small details that you haven't learned so far about the stack that you've been using. I know I did find some stuff when we were developing this, and I've been using Java EE for years now, like 5-6 years, and I still learned when we were making this, because it's just small obvious things that you might miss. We tried to make explicit here that this is the way we recommend you build Vaadin applications, and it's a very good reminder if nothing else.
So could I use this, for example, this started if I want to create a new Vaadin project using either Spring or Java and just modify it?
not should, I think, or like, I would say that you should. It's not a question of could, but you should.
Okay.
I would definitely say that now when we have done these, and if anyone needs a project that's Spring or Java EE based, I highly recommend you start from these.
With this.
Yes, definitely. I know I will, and I know internal projects here at Vaadin that have done that exact same thing. Or if you're not using the whole thing, you can copy some stuff. You can copy the repositories, you can copy the security, you can copy testing, for instance, or the setup code, anything. And it's a very good like a reference material for any project, in my opinion.
What if I have already a Spring application or a Java application which is in production already and everything?
Yeah.
I want to kind of see if I'm using the right thing.
Yeah.
Is this going to help me?
Yeah, I would say that it helps you. Of course, if you have already running applications, you might not want to make changes to that willy-nilly. So I would suggest that you carefully study it. But still, it might be that you see some sort of pattern that we've used differently than you have. That might give you ideas on do something in the future, or maybe you even want to change your code to be more like ours. I'm not saying that ours is the correct way of always doing things, definitely not. It's an opinionated small project. We think it works for us, we like how it's built, and we're proud to share it. If it doesn't work for you, then yeah, of course, that's fine. But I would say that even in the case that you have something running, if you just read through the code and then just see if we did it correct, or if there's something new that you want to learn.
It sounds like a project that will answer this kind of questions that are related to how do you guys do this correctly?
Yes,
I think it contains a lot of answers.
Yes, definitely. And I said that actually in the beginning, that is the main reason why we did this. We've had so many questions on how do you use Spring, how do you use Java EE, how do you set up security, how do you do this and that. And this is what we do in-house, in our own projects. This is what we do. Our reference material is this. And now you have an access to that as well. And it's quite awesome, actually. I've been waiting for this for quite a while. Now I don't need to answer the questions anymore.
Awesome. Yeah, you all have now the answers there for the fingerprint or a click, I guess. A couple of clicks. You have to decide if you want to use Java or Spring.
Yeah.
But there's another topic I wanted to ask you, actually. It's testing. Is there any tests in place?
I know some people don't like tests, but they are quite useful in many cases. So we decided to add tests to these as well. So what we did was, instead of just having unit tests for everything, because that's basically pretty boring, you can probably do that yourselves. What we decided to do is help you do testing with the Vaadin environment in mind. So what we have is integration tests that are done with TestBench, and then we have load tests or scripts for load tests done with Gatling.
Okay.
So there's basically infrastructure in both of these projects so that you can create your own testing environment. You can run the integration tests directly on your own computer after downloading the projects. There's instructions included in the code how to do that. There's dozens and dozens of TestBench validation and integration tests in there already that you can take a look at how those are done, how we recommend you structure your tests, how you should run them, and so forth.
I guess we are not running them.
No. I tried to. I ran them earlier, and they took longer than this webinar has taken so far. I was doing some other things.
So I guess it's good coverage.
It is pretty good coverage. Yeah, there's a lot of examples on how to do things, and especially like if you're not familiar with TestBench, it teaches you how to use the Element API of TestBench and like build your tests in a maintainable way.
Right.
And the Gatling stuff similarly. So there's scripts that allow you to load test your application. So like scripts that basically record user activity and then documentation on how to replicate that 10,000 times. So the idea is that you deploy the bakery on a server, and then you have another server that just starts bombing user requests to your server, and then you can measure how your server behaves. So can you scale up to 500 users, 1,000, 10,000? And of course the documentation there on how you can expand on those tests, how you get them running, and so forth. There's also Java helpers for the Vaadin servlet, which needs some configuration. There, all of that is included in the code base.
Awesome. What else can we cover? I think you actually have covered most of the topics related to.
Yeah, as I said, there's a lot of small details in here. There's no possibility that I can cover everything. We've already been going for 45 minutes, and I haven't even covered how we do a login. That's a webinar in itself almost.
Yeah. Also testing, I think that would take a whole webinar.
Yeah, pretty much.
Or even two.
Yeah.
So, what if we go through some questions? Because I can see some questions here. So first one, Jan Buffworld, I think, is asking why Shiro instead of JAS, that is Java Authentication and Authorization Service?
Yes, so the Java EE has a built-in standard for security, which is JAS. And Shiro is not a standard, it's a third-party tool. We think that Shiro is easier to use, and we also think that a lot of the industry is using Shiro instead of JAS. JAS was very good for, it was made for the older technologies, Java technologies, JSP, JSF, stuff like that. It doesn't really play well with Vaadin. Shiro works much more, or it works much better. It's easier to set up. It's very similar to Spring Security, which is a benefit for us in this project, of course, as well. True. But that's basically why we chose Shiro. It's easier to use, simple as that.
Excellent. So next question is from Julian Boyle, I guess, and it says, does the Navigator class support the HTML5 History API?
Not yet. But in 8.2 we'll have support for this. It's something that's relatively new and we haven't had a chance to integrate it yet. But in 8.2 Alpha 2 we'll have support for this, and that will be out soon-ish, I've heard from the guys in the office. So you'll be able to test it very soon.
I saw the merge of the patch integrating this already. Yeah. So yeah, it's going to be out pretty soon.
Yes.
Awesome. Luis Trigueiros is asking, he's saying, I would love to use the event bus with the default integration. I guess he's asking if he can.
Yeah, and probably about the Spring event bus that I mentioned already. So yeah, the CDI add-on uses CDI's own event bus mechanism, and there's really no configuration needed for that. Spring is a little bit different. There we use the Petter Holmström's his add-on, and as I said, it's a feature that we have in the backlog, but we've been too busy to add it, unfortunately. We will get on that as soon as we can, but we have other slightly more pressing things that we're doing that you'll learn about next week.
True. All right. Jonathan Andrews is asking, would this work with Java EE 8? That's a good question.
I have to admit I haven't personally tested it with Java EE 8 servers yet, but I see no reason why it wouldn't. Java EE is fully backwards compatible, so Bakery runs on all modern Java EE 7 servers, and it uses EE 7 features, so it should work on EE 8.
It should work. Yeah, I guess it should work.
If it doesn't, please ping me and we'll fix it.
Great. I'll do it if I find something not working, for sure. Cheryl Alberta is asking, which Java EE servers are supported?
Let me check my notes here. So supported Java EE application servers at the moment are Wildfly 10 and above, Liberty, the newest version, and then Tom EE, not the standard version, but the Plume distribution specifically of Tom EE. The reason for this is that the standard version of Tom EE uses JPA 2.0, while we need 2.1.
Okay.
they're saying that they will include 2.1, and actually I think some of the documentation states that they are already including 2.1, but they're not. So the Plume installation is the one you want if you're running Tommy.
All right, that's a good tip. I think that's all I have from here right now. We can maybe start to wrap up this.
All right. So if you're interested on taking a look at this, go to vaadin.com/start, and there you have the page that I showed you earlier. You can download these samples, get the evaluation license if you just want to try things out. And yeah, take a look at the stuff. We're really proud of getting both of these out, and I think the code quality, the comments, documentation, everything is top notch. And there's so many little things here that we get lots of questions for. So I think it's like, just as a reference material, it's awesome, but it has the added benefit of being able to serve as an application base for any new project. So you can just start building your own project on top of these, and I think that's pretty awesome.
Definitely, yeah. I'm going to use this for any next project we need to start. So yeah, please go to vaadin.com/start. You'll find not only these, but some other resources there. Experiment with the code. Let us know what you think. Any questions you have about topics that we have covered today, please write them in the forums. We'll take a look at that later.
Yeah, definitely.
And well, I think that's pretty much about it. Thank you very much, and see you next time.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.